Thank you very much, Congressman Gosar, and I appreciate you convening this hearing today. Over the past 3 years, we've observed a disturbing trend with this administration, an ever-growing dependence on extremist organizations to shape the policy decisions. The Biden administration appears to be governed by a fear of upsetting its most progressive faction. The policies enacted by this administration show the significant influence of these extremist groups. This undue influence leads the administration to prioritize appeasing these destructive groups, especially considering the coming elections. One area where this external pressure is directly felt is in our energy and public land sectors. We've recently witnessed an attempt by the administration to pursue the demands of these groups by advocating for the commoditization of our public land and resources, disregarding the needs of local communities and businesses reliant on these lands for their livelihoods and in violation of the current statute. While this scheme was thwarted, the residual effects linger, exemplified by the recently implemented Conservation and Landscape Health Rule, which flagrantly violates the Taylor Grazing Act and the attempts to breach the lower Snake River dams. Mr. O'Neill, I really appreciate your comments and your insight as to what's been taking place. It's widely acknowledged that the U.S. produces some of the cleanest oil and gas globally, using the most environmentally sound practices. Despite this, Secretary Haaland and the current administration persist in bragging about the reduction in lease sales. Given this administration's purported focus on climate issues, how do you explain their desire to increase our dependence on comparatively dirtier foreign sources of oil and gas, which is produced with little or no care for the environment?
Yeah, I think it is directly contrary. The more that we outsource the drilling of oil and gas, the worse it is for the global environment. Those who really care about climate change on a global level should be concerned about this.
Mr. Walter, when we talk about the far-left environmental activism, there are two individual names that frequently come up: George Soros and Hans-Jörg Wyss. Mr. Walter, can you talk about these two men and why they have taken an interest in the policy area?
Mr. Wyss probably deserves more attention because he's far less well-known. He has given roughly $500 million as a foreign national to American nonprofits that engage in politics and public policy debate, including C4s that give money to super PACs, which he, of course, is not allowed to do. If you go to the FEC database, you can also see that he made direct political contributions to multiple members of the Democratic Party in Congress. Unfortunately, that wasn't discovered until the statute of limitations had expired. So he continues to give hundreds of millions of dollars to the Arabella Network. In fact, he was probably the original sugar daddy when the Arabella Network was just getting started in the 2000s. He's also been the source of he's had an FEC complaint lodged against him and his Arabella compatriots. The FEC, unfortunately, did nothing about it, as it usually does, but the general counsel at the FEC urged that both Arabella and he be sanctioned.
So, Mr. Walter, do you have any insights on their end goals when influencing public policy, but most specifically in the natural resource space?
Arabella has said that roughly 1/3 of its work in its network is in the environmental space, and Mr. Wyss especially has done that. As I said, he's on the board, as is his Dark Money Group's president of the Wilderness Society.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would yield back the balance of my time. I find it interesting that we have all these conversations about who the witnesses are and the organizations that they represent and or work for. One thing I'm glad to see is at least they're all domestic. At least I know that these organizations have the best interests of America as their main mission and goal, whereas the other groups that are funding a lot of the opposition to keep us from developing our natural resources are not domestic. They do not have our best interests at heart. And that is where the big conflict begins. The other thing that I find very interesting as we talk about making sure that the public lands are not only preserved and protected, but that they are utilized, and when they are utilized, to make sure that a fair amount of that revenue that is generated because of the development of whatever resources they are, that it actually goes back to benefit the taxpayers across this country. Meanwhile, within the last 30 days, I watched this committee lease a piece of public land, federal public land, parkland, that RFK Stadium currently sits on, to Washington, D.C. for $1, and they are going to be able to have that completely developed, 160 acres, right here in Washington, D.C., and collect all of the revenue that it generates without having to pay a penny of it, except, of course, that $1 in their lease agreement. The rest of the revenue will be retained by Washington, D.C. So as we say in Montana, it just depends on whose ox is getting gored before they make decisions about where the priority of revenue and the maintenance of properties comes from or goes to. Mr. Walter, in January of 2022, the Bureau of Land Management announced a proposed rule to allow for the withdrawal of land within a 10-mile radius from mineral development within the Chaco Culture Natural Historical Park. Secretary Holland has long advocated for withdrawing the land from the historical park from mineral use. Her family, including her adult child, also continued to do so, including going so far as to make a documentary about the need for this decision, which has screened at the Capitol Visitor Center. Despite DOI's own ethics office determination that this could constitute a conflict of interest, Secretary Holland reportedly stated that no reasonable person would question her impartiality. So, Mr. Walter, my question to you is, do you believe this is a reasonable person that this might constitute a conflict of interest for the Secretary?
Congressman, I don't think that passes the laugh test, no.
How do you think a conflict of interest like this by Secretary should be handled in this situation?
Well, all of the proper ethics requirements, which my colleague here, Mr. Painter, has discussed, need to be respected. And of course, in this case, one of the problems was that she got to be a judge in her own cause, right? She was the one who was given the decision to say whether what she was doing was fine. And again, ordinary Americans would not understand that as true ethical decision-making.
Mr. Painter, you've been pretty outspoken against some of the things that the Republicans have been doing. Does this pass your smell test?
I don't believe this is a partisan issue. If the ethics lawyer gives advice, I'd expect it to be followed. I'm a former government ethics lawyer, and it's not up for the department head to decide whether the department head is biased or not, or should recuse. If the ethics lawyer says you should recuse, you recuse. I don't care if you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent.
Mr. Walter, can you tell us about the Pueblo Action Alliance?
Well, as I tried to outline in my testimony, it's hard to find anybody who would be more perfectly fitting the description of radical and extremist. And again, so radical and extreme that they're willing to ally themselves with communist dictatorships and the like. It's off the charts.
Mr. Walter, I'm getting ready to run out of time here. Has Secretary Holland's family been involved in that organization, and did the Secretary herself have any role in its creation?
I'm not certain about the role in the creation, but her adult child is one of its leaders, and in my written testimony especially, I documented all these connections.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walter. Mr. Chair, I yield back. I'm going to go back to Mr. Painter, because we are getting some breath of bipartisan condemnation from you, so I'll take it. Do you believe? Well, first, I understand that you share similar concerns as the committee regarding foreign actors and dark money seeking to influence federal policy. Do you believe there's an effort by foreign governments to exert influence over public lands and natural resource policy here in our country?
I'm sure there is. an attempt by foreign governments to exercise influence. As I mentioned, President Vladimir Putin gave the Presidential Medal of Friendship to the Chief Executive Officer of Glencore Corporation in 2017, just as they were trying to petition for
Let me
opening a
ask you this. I
sulfide mine in
understand you've
Minnesota.
got this fixation with Vladimir Putin, and I'm sorry about that. But what I'm trying to identify is, while there may be foreign entities that are trying to develop the resources here, what about the foreign entities that are trying to keep us from developing our natural resources?
I'm sure they're going to be active in that space as well, but I emphasize.
Okay, I'm glad you say that. Now, let me ask you this. Do you feel that the United States, with the oversight that we provide through the different agencies that we have, is able to develop our domestic resources cleaner and with better labor standards than other countries?
If we decide what our own rules are going to be, but we have more and more farmland in America owned by the Chinese.
Sir, excuse me. Do you believe, based upon what is actually taking place, not theory, what is actually taking place in the development of our resources, that we do a better job as far as protecting the environment and taking care of our workers than the development of those exact same resources overseas?
Not necessarily. If we don't fix our
Okay,
campaign finance system, we won't.
would you please then cite to me some place that's doing a better job than one of the coal mines that I have visited in Montana, Colstrip, where we have not only the safest development of those resources, but also reclamation efforts that actually can scientifically, quantitatively prove that the land is more productive after it's been reclaimed than it was before they extracted the resources. So could you refer to me, cite some country
I am
that's doing
citing
this?
you to the repeated work I and many others have done about the corruption of our campaign finance
Okay, so
system.
where is this
and our
country
lobbying
that's doing a
system.
better job of developing the resources and protecting the environment and the workers than we are?
They will do China,
Where is
countries
this
such
country?
as China,
Where is this
Russia,
country, sir?
I'm trying to explain this to you. If we don't fix our
I
campaign
understand
finance
geography.
system,
Please explain
and
to
our
me the
ethics
geography
rules,
of a country that's doing a better job of developing natural resources and protecting the environment and the people
That's
that are
not the
developing those
point.
resources. Could you please
That's
cite that
not
country?
the point. What I'm saying is we're going to
Then I
have
have no
foreign
further
countries
questions for you. That is
dominating
the point.
our
That is the
country.
point. What you're trying to do is allow foreign countries to control the development of the resources here in our country when they are being developed more scientifically sound, environmentally safe, and with better labor conditions than any other country on earth. And meanwhile, you cannot cite to me another country that does a better job. I'm moving on.
You're not moving on because you're not fixing
I'm
the
reclaiming
corrupt
my
campaign
time.
finance system.
Sir, I'm reclaiming my time. Mr. Walter, I would like to go back and spend a little bit of time on Secretary Holland, because we hear about all the accusations. We hear about all the complaints that were filed. Look, you can file a lawsuit or a complaint against anybody in this nation at any time. What counts is convictions. And again, we are, in this country, still innocent until proven guilty. But when you are running one of these agencies, and we've had Secretary Holland before us many, many times, it's as much about the perception of a conflict of interest as it is an actual conviction by the Ethics Committee. In what ways are you aware, I would like to go back to this Pueblo Action Alliance. In what ways are you aware that this organization has been influencing the actions and the decisions made by the Department of Interior?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question. As I said in my testimony, in the written version has more examples. I investigated the various things that you and your colleagues have written in your letters to the department repeatedly with your concerns about Pueblo and the secretary and Pueblo and the rest of the department. And I think those are very well documented. And the other thing I would say real quick is that it's worth noting that all the accusations of the previous administration, those accusations were made by multiple groups popped into existence by the Arabella Advisors Network.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.